hey, Luke here. So you've made the decision, the brand needs to change. Something's off and you can feel it. Sales feel harder than they should. The right people aren't showing up the way they used to. You're carrying more of the weight than you should have to. So you do what every smart founder and seasoned business owner that I've met does at this moment. You decide it's time to rebrand. And here's where most get it wrong. Not in the execution, not in the choice of agency, but before the first conversation even starts. So if you stick with me for the next few minutes, I'll show you the part that almost everyone skips. A rebrand isn't a visual update, or it shouldn't be. It's a change in what the brand carries. Everything your business looks and sounds like on the outside is communicating something right now to every prospect who looks you up before they reach out, to every potential team member who checks your website before they apply, to every existing client who's quietly deciding whether to stay or go elsewhere. That's either working for you or against you. And here's the part that most rebrand conversations skip entirely. You can't see your own brand clearly from the inside of your business. Not because you're not smart enough, of course you are, but because you're too close to it. That proximity is a feature of great leadership. It's not a flaw, but it creates a specific blind spot that the best founders and seasoned business owners that I know are almost always subject to. So most rebrands focus entirely on the visual. New logo, updated colors, refreshed website, and they might look great. But if what's underneath hasn't changed, the same friction comes back. It's just a different look with the same outcome. So after 27 years, we see the same two problems behind almost every rebrand request. And the request is almost never really about the visual identity. I'm sure it plays a part, but it's almost always one of two things. The first is that they can't sell without the founder or the owner, the leader, being in the room themselves. Every significant deal needs their personal presence. The brand isn't doing the heavy lifting before the conversation or after. The moment this person steps out, the momentum stalls. The second is they can't attract or keep the right people. The talent that they want keeps choosing the other brand. The people that they invest in keep leaving, and the brand isn't helping. So a rebrand feels like the obvious answer to both, but it rarely is. If you recognize either of these two, the rebrand isn't your first move. It shouldn't be. It should be your last move, because what you're trying to fix isn't how the brand looks. It's what the brand's carrying when you're not there. Let me show you exactly what I mean. All right, so let me draw this. But first, the rule that we need to hold underneath all of this is that nothing in business stands still. Everything is either growing or declining. And what decides which direction is the decisions and the actions being made continuously every day. So there's no flat. Okay, so hold on to that. Now, we've got two axes on this diagram. We have time and we have attention. Right, so either going up or down. Got it? So that's the baseline. Now, it starts over here at day one. Let me just grab this. It starts here at day one, launch. Right? Now, you and the brand, you, the founder and the brand, or founder and the brand, are essentially the same thing. So you're going up, right, at the same time as the brand. Right? That's because every decision, every action, it is all you, all pointing in the same way. And it climbs, it's climbing steadily, one line going up together in unison, because while it's just you and the brand move as one. Now, you get to a point, that line there, where it's no longer just you. Team members come in. And this is the moment it splits. So you keep moving in your direction because you're awesome. right? Because you're making those growth decisions. You're developing, you're sharpening, right? You're improving, aligning, growing with the customers. You keep moving. You are magnetic. That's just the nature of it. But the brand starts heading in the other direction because while you're focusing on that, everything else is in decline because there's no static and it splits, right? So nothing stands still. The brand doesn't hold, it declines. The paths pull apart. Now this here is the brand gap. Okay? So here's the part that catches everyone. While you're in the room, your presence reaches across and it pulls this up. So it gives you the illusion that everything's okay. It gives everyone the illusion that the brand is working. And this is the reality distortion field, right? This only holds while you're standing there, while you're doing the work. That's why when you step out, it collapses. But this becomes the actual line. That's the brand when you're not there, right? So a rebrand that ignores this gap doesn't close it. It just paints over it. Okay? So here's a sequence that plays out more often than most people would care to admit. The friction that is felt is real. The decision's made. The agency's briefed. The work begins. The agency does exactly what they are briefed to do. So it looks good. It launches. There's a lift. And energy does rise. Things feel better. Then the goodwill window closes. So a strong rebrand launch buys you a few weeks, maybe a couple of months. The energy change is real. Then someone hits one of the problems that are still there again. A deal goes quiet. A prospect hesitates. The wrong person applies or gets through. And that goodwill window starts, the goodwill starts draining because the expectation that the rebrand created is now bumping up the reality against the reality that it didn't fix. So the brief was built on assumptions, smart ones, the kind that come from years of experience, but assumptions nonetheless, not on what the brand is actually saying, not on what is driving the friction from underneath. There's a layer of diagnostic work that needs to happen before a brief is ever written. And most businesses skip it entirely, not because they're careless, but because they don't know it exists. So there's a line that most rebrand conversations never reach. So a brand makes a promise, an expectation. What happens inside the business either delivers on that promise or it quietly or loudly contradicts it. And when the two don't match, a rebrand does something unexpected, right? It raises the expectation without improving the delivery. And that causes problem. Because if we come back to this picture, right? This gap right here, this is where it gets felt by the prospect who lands on the new website and senses something isn't matching what they've experienced, by the candidate who looks great on paper but never shows up, by the client who quietly starts looking elsewhere, right? And they don't explain why. They can't explain why. So you can't outmarket a culture problem, right? And you can't out-design a brand that's saying the wrong thing. Good design today is table stakes. You must look the part to charge the part. That's the price of entry, right? People don't buy purely on what you sell, though. They buy how and why you do it. So the foundation diagnostic layer that's missing is the work that decides whether a rebrand creates a lasting change or it just buys some time until the friction comes back. So something that rarely gets said, even a well-built rebrand, when the real foundation work is done, the right story is developed, it'll still fade if what we call the amplify layer isn't created and sustained. So a launch strategy simply isn't enough. Your audience is too busy. They're too bombarded with messages today. They're too saturated with competing messages for the same attention. They can't absorb a new brand story in a single go, not the wholeness of it, right? No matter how strong your launch is. So without an ongoing rhythm that keeps your culture, your impact, your good story at the center of what you're telling, and told repeatedly across time, across all your channels, even the most meaningful rebrand becomes a flash in the pan. The brand might have changed, but the world didn't notice, because the world rarely notices anything once, right? So here's a question: rebrand or refresh? So refresh updates the surface only. Now rebrand changes what the brand carries. But here's what this question almost always misses. Neither one does anything meaningful if the foundation underneath hasn't been diagnosed first, right? And neither one holds without a sustained rhythm to carry that new story forward. So the question isn't which one you need. The question is whether you know what's actually broken, whether the brief that you're about to hand someone is built on a customer reality or your best interpretation of it only. Those are two very different things, and the gap between them is where most rebrand budgets quietly disappear. So before you choose an agency, before you approve a scope, before you spend a single dollar, do you know what your brand is actually saying right now? And I'm talking about not what you intend to say, but not what you've always believed that it communicates, but what it's actually saying to the prospects who look you up, right? To the talent that's considering joining you, and the clients that are quietly deciding whether they're going to stay. And do you know what happens to that in that moment that you step out of the room? Because this is what happens. The moment you step out, the whole thing drops, right? Everything that your presence was holding up is gone. That's the same collapse from earlier, a brand gap that you can't see from the inside of your own business. And a rebrand won't help find that for you. Recognizing the pattern isn't the same as diagnosing it. There could be two businesses that look identical on the surface and be driven by completely different causes underneath. And if you can't answer what those are with certainty, the rebrand isn't ready to start. So before you invest in a redesign, find out what's actually going on beneath the surface. Our Ember tool is 27 years of brand experience distilled into a single check. It's fast, it's free, and it's private. The link is below. I encourage you, run Ember now, and you'll know exactly where your gap is sitting before you brief anyone.